And now, with great interest from a number of us in the room, I'm sure, we're now going to hear about a very exciting piece of technology which is being applied to medicines that can really make a difference, a huge difference in this area. Proteus Digital Health is one of the most talked about companies in the sector at the moment, and I'm delighted that Barnaby Poulton is here today. He's head of regional customer partnering, where he's leading new ventures with the NHS, academia and commercial organisations. Barnaby trained as a pharmacist, starting his career in the NHS at the Royal Hampshire County Hospital in Winchester. Prior to joining Proteus, he was UK Director of MSD's Oncology Products Business, and whilst at MSD, he established digital marketing as a core activity for the UK organisation and led the Univardis Medical Portal team, a leading online resource for doctors, pharmacists and nurses to access up-to-date news and CPD free of charge. Earlier in his career, Barnaby led commercial and clinical development of MSD Informatics, an entrepreneurial startup within MSD, taking it from R&D through to a market-leading informatics company, winning national contracts with the NHS. So Barnaby clearly comes with an excellent pedigree, but what we really want to hear about is what's going on at Proteus. Barnaby.
Great, well, thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about technology, and then I'll come on to talk about Proteus and then adherence in sequence. So I'll just set the scene a bit about some of the opportunities that are there and some of the technologies that are enabling Proteus to move into some really exciting new areas. So here's a bit of a scene set then. The world that we're in is changing faster than any of us can really keep track of. If I look back just 15 years, back to around 2010, we're all old enough to remember what 2000 looks like. And Amazon just coming into the marketplace and eBay. These are really profoundly changing technologies at the time. But the reality is they weren't doing anything big and different to what we were already doing before. We already bought books, and we already went to car boot sales on Sundays to go and get rid of stuff that we didn't want. What we're doing with these is putting what we were doing previously online. We weren't actually fundamentally changing the way that we were delivering businesses. We weren't actually fundamentally changing the business models. If we wind forward to somewhere around 2010, we begin to see new businesses arriving, driven and enabled by technology. You can't do Google without the internet. You can't do Facebook. You can't do LinkedIn. They are predicated upon connectivity between people from different parts of the world, in different businesses, in different environments, interacting with each other through the internet. So these are entirely new models of business, entirely new models of living our lives, which have come through the ubiquity of the internet. And we're now moving to an entirely new phase, another particularly exciting one. And if anything, it's going to change things even more than we've seen with the internet over the last 10 to 15 years. And it's related to the Internet of Things. We have sensors, we have technologies which are so small that they can be embedded into everything in our daily lives, whether it's into your car, where it can connect through to the internet to advance warn you of traffic on the M1 in your drive down here today, whether it's the gas tank that lives in my front garden, which talks to Calla on a regular basis to let it know that we haven't got a leak in the gas tank and when it needs refilling. We can have sensors in our clothes to monitor our activity and our day-to-day movements. Fitbits, I'm sure some of you are wearing a Fitbit in the audience today or something similar. And you're constantly being able to feed information into the internet and really change the way that we're living our lives. And one of the interesting things that I think is that this doesn't necessarily translate through to the way healthcare is transforming. So if we look at the way that health is delivered today, it doesn't look that dissimilar to the way health was delivered probably 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So we still have buildings that you go to have health delivered to you by doctors. And buildings we're really, really good at. We've been good at those for hundreds of years. And doctors, where we have people with information and knowledge and an experience in their head, is another byproduct of a 19th and 20th century invention, which is education for all. So we have people delivering health in hospitals and using medicines which are safe in pretty much everybody, but only work in some people. And that's the nature of where medicines have been developed over the years, and that's just as it should be. But this is all very much around treating people who are sick, people who are acutely ill, and using the technology that we have to best effect. Let's wind the clock forward then to look at actually what the opportunity looks like today. So perhaps we then begin to think about the opportunity that mobile represents to us, the opportunity that connectivity through smartphones and the ability to deliver health through technology tools that we're carrying with us all the time. So we don't need to go to somewhere to get health. We don't need to go and talk to somebody to gain advice. We have it. We have it with us constantly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And that presents some really interesting opportunities to redesign and redevelop healthcare around individuals and the way that they're living their lives, because they've got devices with them all the time. And they're connecting through to cloud information. We've got all of the information that's ever existed is accessible at our fingertips, together with decision support tools and algorithms that can provide information away from having to go to see a specific doctor who has the information in their head, to be able to provide something which is more immediate and personalized to me. And then moving from medicines that work in some people but are safe and all, we instead begin to think about services which are designed around the individual and the way that that individual is living their lives. So there's a really significant change which is underway, and it's something that we're excited to be part of. And just give you some specific data related to mobile phones. I'm guessing, without asking everybody, that everybody here has a mobile phone in their pocket. And I'm guessing that virtually everybody in this room will have a mobile phone which has apps on it, so it's a smartphone. If you look at this data, this is from last year, you can see the growth in smartphones. This is here in the UK, where people are about 10% per year on year, buying more smartphones. And this is across socioeconomic groups, it's across age groups. And there's some lags in some age groups and socioeconomic groups, as you might imagine. But it's there and it's happening. And if you look at some of the newer mobile phones coming into the marketplace now, which are coming in from China, they've been made extremely cheaply. So that there'll be, as far as I would be concerned, pretty much universal coverage of smartphones right across a patient population within a very, very short amount of time. But more interesting than this, I think, is the amount of data which is used by people. So the amount of data being used by smartphones is growing at 70% per annum. So we live more and more of our lives enabled by our smartphones. So the challenge is, why can't we do something similar in health? And that's the beginning of the Proteus story. So let me talk to you a bit about what we do. I have in my pocket one of our sensors, and it's in this card. And I've shown this to a few people already earlier, but in this card, I'll hold up against the white, there's a tiny dot, which is one of our ingestible sensors. These sensors we can put into any solid dosage form, whether it's a pill or it's a capsule. And when that sensor is taken by the patient, the sensor switches on. So it's in their stomach and turns on. It sends a message out to say that I've been taken. So we have an ability to objectively measure for the very first time exactly when a medicine's been taken. The sensor, incidentally, works a bit like a potato battery. If you've ever made a potato battery, it has a silicon chip in the middle, which is programmable, and then a bit of copper on one side and a bit of magnesium on the other. And when the chip ends up in your stomach, it switches on. The electrons move from one metal to the other, creates a circuit, and then sends a message out. And the message will be something on the lines of, I'm a 20 milligram atorvastatin tablet, and then the patch, which we also give to patients, will pick up that message and timestamp it. So you took it at 7:30 in the evening, for example. So we have that objective measure, which we can then feed back to patients. The sensor, incidentally, then just dissolves. It works for 2 to 3 minutes. It dissolves away, and then it's just absorbed into the body. It's made of the sort of things that you would normally find in a mineral supplement, and it's about what you'd get in a mouthful of fish, a cashew nut, and a slice of banana, just to give you an idea of the amounts of copper and magnesium that's in there. So we've begun this digital journey then. It's been there with the pill, it's into the patient's stomach. The patient then, with their patch on, has this information about how their medicine's taking looks on a day-by-day basis, and we build that data up. So we begin to see patterns of medicines taking. So what we don't do is get to the end of the month and we have a look in the bottle and we see how many pills the patient's taken, and we probably threw a few down the toilet because we know we're going to go and talk to the doctor and we don't want him to think that we're a bad person, so we'll throw some away. And look, I have been taking 28 tablets have gone, I've been taking one a day, just as you said. Actually, we can measure that. And importantly, it's the patient's data. So it's them generating this information, it's them owning this. And that's a really important part of this. And they have this fed back to them via a mobile device. So either their own phone, or at the moment we're lending people iPads so that they have an insight into how their own medicine's taking actually looks to them. And we also collect other data as well. So we collect data about their patterns of daily activity, their heart rate, where they're standing up, they're sitting down, they're lying down, skin temperature, and so on. So we can provide a complete picture of how a patient is living their daily lives together with their medicines taking. And then the patient, if they choose, can share that information with their clinical team. And again, this is this important part from our perspective. This is the patient's data, and they will hopefully actively want to involve their clinical team with this so that they can have a better conversation about what their medicine taking looks like. So we've wrapped all of this up into something we call Proteus Discover. This is a new product for us, which actually the first patients have gone literally this week. So this is quite an exciting time for us. We've done a lot of work in this area before, but this is our new sort of wrapper, which includes the pills, the patches to pick the information up, and the mobile devices, together with a portal for the clinical team to have a look at. And by doing this, we're really bringing together the data, the analytics, and hopefully making this medicines taking experience more effective for the patient and for the NHS. And this is part of the work that we're now doing, is to evaluate, well, what does this mean? What's the impact of this on the patient, on the clinician, and on the payer, the person who's actually paying this? And that's all of us in being taxpayers. And what we're looking to achieve here, from a clinical team's perspective, is greater insights into medicines taking, more data, objective information, so that we can have a different conversation, a better conversation with the patient, which is driven by data as opposed to by a bit of a game of trying to work out whether I didn't or didn't take the pills. And hopefully we then get more engaged patients. And for me, this is a really exciting part of this story, where a patient who's bringing data that they have generated themselves to a discussion. And we're going to try and measure that as well, using something called a patient activation measure, which is a validated scoring system of how engaged a patient is in their health. And I think that's really interesting and exciting as an opportunity to really shift the paradigm in terms of the ownership and involvement of a patient with their medicines taking. For the patients themselves, it's about then having my condition better managed. And by having my data available to my clinical team, be able to have care that is more personalised to me. And that's incredibly important. So we don't have a one-size-fits-all, the medicines that are safe in everybody will work in some. Actually, I can have something which is a service which is bespoke to my needs and the way that I live my life and how I need to take my medicines. So this is some of the really transformational journey that we're now beginning. So we've packaged this all up. We've got a range of different, what we're calling co-encapsulated medicines. We're putting our sensors alongside a small panel of drugs in the first instance, focused on cardiovascular disease and diabetes. Both of these conditions are long-term conditions with patients who need to take their medicines for a long time. So to be able to support patients with those conditions seems like a very sensible place to start. And I'm going to give you a few examples of work that we're doing in hypertension, which, as many of you will know, is particularly challenging because it's an asymptomatic condition, and you give somebody a pill which gives them some side effects or gives them something else to think about, is really challenging when it comes to medicines taking and adherence. So that's one of the areas of focus that we have. So how we look at this then is to use our technology-enabled services on an episodic basis. What we don't see, and certainly in this first instance, is people using our technologies constantly. What we see is an intervention period, a diagnostic tool, if you like, so that we can understand what medicines taking looks like for that particular person. So we're looking at two use cases, 4 weeks and 12 weeks. I'll focus more on the 4 weeks for today. And that's enough time to really understand how this patient is taking their medicines. How does it fit into their lives? What are the patterns that develop over that period of time? And we can also begin to then pull out some really interesting data which can correlate with, say, a patient's blood pressure. and begin to understand, if we looked at a patient who had been struggling to get their blood pressure under control, actually what is the root cause of that? Is it that they do genuinely need more pills? They're taking their medicines as they should, and there is a degree of disease progression or some pharmacological resistance, which we need to understand. If we can measure somebody's medicines taken for a month, we can gain an understanding, if they're taking their medicines as they should, whether they fall into that group. If they're adherent, they're taking their meds as they have been prescribed, and their blood pressure is still too high. Well, great, I know you absolutely. We need to do something specific with you, which relates to more investigations, more or different pills. And that's fine, that's entirely appropriate. There's another group who, despite taking their medicines as they should, their blood pressure, we take their medicines as they should, their blood pressure is okay. So you then have a different discussion with them, whereby we've shown that these patients are taking their medicines as they've been prescribed. Perhaps they weren't doing before. And we have this interesting thing called the Hawthorne effect, which by looking at a patient's behaviour, their behaviour changes. So they start to take their medicines as they should, and their blood pressure comes down. So for those patients, we don't need to refer them on to a cardiologist. We don't need to give them more pills. We don't need to change their pills. We can have a different discussion with them. We can talk to them about how we maintain that behaviour, how we sustain that medicines taking, which actually they've shown they've been able to do over the previous 4 weeks. How do we embed that? How do we maintain that? So we have an entirely different conversation. And for the first time, using the data that we've been able to supply, we can separate these two groups of patients out. There's a third group, of course, and these are the patients who, despite all of the information that we've been able to give them, they're still not able to take their medicines as they should. So that's a different discussion again. And it might be that we change the formulation, so it moves from a twice daily to a once daily meds. It could be we have a discussion with a carer to support them, or that they need some other types of interventions. But we have very specific and targeted things that we're going to do differently that we weren't able to do before. And that's also the beginning of the economic argument as to where the Proteus technologies fit. Because as we begin to redesign a particular service for a patient, it gives us opportunities to save money by, for example, not referring that person to somebody expensive. So let me finish up by talking to you a bit about two different pieces of work that we've done here in the UK. Firstly, with general practitioners. This is a UK study based around hypertension again, using our technologies for 2 weeks, which works well in hypertension. You see a very prompt response to people changing their behaviours and to be able to understand their medicines taking during that period. And you see blood pressures coming down in many cases. So we had 168 patients in this piece of work. This is some interim data with 141. And where we end up is that we see about a third of patients who are hypertensive to start off with, but start to take their medicines as they should through the Hawthorne effect during this intervention period. So around a third of patients who were persistently hypertensive previously now have their blood pressure under control after 2 weeks. So we have that different conversation with them. How do we embed this? How do we maintain this behaviour going forwards? And then 2/3 of the patients who were taking their medicines as they should, we could see that within their patterns of medicines taking, and we need to do something different with them. But we're immediately using our resources and our time with our patient in a very, very different way. And then a smaller group here who genuinely needed some more adherence support or a different type of discussion. Now, interestingly, we did a second piece of work with pharmacists. We worked with 15 pharmacies, and they recruited similar types of patients. So patients who are persistently hypertensive, who were on multiple medications. They came in, we measured their medicines taking over a period of 2 weeks, and we found almost exactly the same results. About a third of patients were managed under their existing therapy, and about 2/3 of patients needed something else. And it means to us that we can work in lots of different settings, and I think this is a really interesting one that we're going to be exploring. So where does the Proteus technology best sit? Is it in a pharmacy? Is it in primary care? Is it in secondary care, where we're also now doing some work? And what does it enable us to do in terms of redesigning the way that care is delivered? Because we now have data that we never had before, we can look at patients in a new way. We can engage patients in their health in new ways. So we can redesign services which are more effective based on the fact that we're able to introduce data that wasn't available previously. So wrapping this up then, it isn't about the technology in many respects, but it's about getting greater insights. It's about having those better conversations between the clinician and the patient. And it's about that sharing of data so that the patient then has something which looks much more like care personalised to them. Thank you very much.
Well, I think we have seen there just quite how exciting it is to have Proteus around in providing this technology. The application of technology to healthcare, there's so many great opportunities, but this is particularly exciting. If we just think back to Amanda's presentation about the impact of adherence, and you think about the data that we can get and then what can be done with that, the future is so exciting, and I look forward to seeing more about the Proteus story as it unveils. It's extremely exciting.